Welcome to the Remote Worker Cybersecurity webinar, sponsored by LMG Security. My name is Stevie Friend, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we start the program, I would like to give you some housekeeping information. First, we encourage attendees to use the computer audio feature of this webinar. During the program, should you experience any audio interference, such as static or intermittent audio, due to a busy network, please use the optional phone connection, which is listed in the audio tab of the webinar interface. Second, you can find a couple of PDF documents related to the webinar content in the Handouts tab. Feel free to download these helpful files for your reference later on. Next, we will have a question and answer session at the end of the program. You may submit questions anytime by using the Questions tab in the webinar interface or save them until the end. Last, but certainly not least, a survey will be available to you at the conclusion of this webinar. Please take the opportunity to provide feedback on your LMG Security webinar experience. Our presenter for the webinar today is Sherry Davidoff. Sherry Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security. As a recognized expert in cybersecurity and data breach response, Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Her new book, Data Breaches, Crisis and Opportunity, is available now. Over her 19-year career, she has conducted cybersecurity training for an array of organizations, including the Department of Defense, the American Bar Association, and the FFIEC-FDIC. Her professional experiences are featured in the book Breaking and Entering, The Extraordinary Story of a Hacker Called Alien. Sherry is a GIAC certified forensic examiner and a penetration tester, receiving her degree in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. Sherry, I am passing you control of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Stevie. It's always a pleasure working with you. So today we're going to talk about remote worker cybersecurity. Our roadmap today is we're going to start off by talking, of course, about Zoom bombing, because that's one of the big topics in the news. We'll discuss other collaboration tools as well. We can take what we learned from securing Zoom and extrapolate that to other tools. We'll discuss remote work environments and how to secure them, working from home, emergency BYOD. A lot of us have rushed to BYOD without really any chance to plan that. And in some cases, high security environments like financial institutions have needed to move to BYOD because they typically don't deploy devices, or they often don't deploy devices for employees to take home. Finally, we'll wrap up by talking about the latest COVID-19 scams to watch out for. These are evolving every day, so we're going to show you some of the latest ones. Along the way, you will find interspersed throughout some checklists and tips for addressing the security issues that we bring up. So remote work security is moving very fast, like this whole crisis. I can tell you, I was up all night last night just reading the latest news articles. You'll see a lot of them have dates from yesterday and the day before. The latest quote from Zoom is that every day is a crisis. Zoom started off, well, not started off, but at the end of last year, Zoom was 10 million users, and they have grown to 200 million users. So think about how much that environment has changed. It is, of course, very stressful for remote workers to adapt to this situation, but it's also, this fast-moving crisis is also putting a lot of pressure on the technology companies that are serving us and providing this infrastructure. So everybody is figuring it out all at the same time. In fact, the CEO of Zoom made a point of putting out a message to our users to address some of the big security issues that came up. And in this, he pointed out that we did not design the product with the foresight that in a matter of weeks, every person in the world would suddenly be working, studying, and socializing from home, presenting us with challenges we did not anticipate when the platform was conceived. And he also talks about the fact that in the past, Zoom's audience has been primarily enterprises, large enterprises that have significant IT support and can devote the resources to helping their users secure the platform. Zoom was able to have defaults that were less secure, in part because they were less targeted. There's a big difference between a 10 million user base and a 200 million user base. And also because they were prioritizing speed and features and functionality over security. And often that happens early on in the life cycle of new technology. But again, as we see that mass deployment, suddenly, it comes to a screeching halt. So literally in the case of Zoom. So the Zoom CEO announced that for 90 days, they are halting all feature development, and they will be focusing on addressing the security and privacy issues that have come up during the past few weeks. And this is happening in response to some pretty significant and high profile issues. Some of the ones that have come out in the past week are Zoom bombing of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And by the way, it is every tech company's dream to have their name become a verb. So Google, let me Google that for you. Let me LMG secure that for you, if only. And in the case of Zoom, unfortunately, there's this Zoom bombing. So hopefully we'll have a better usage of the Zoom name in the future. But anyway, trolls, as they put it in this headline, are breaking into Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and harassing recovering alcoholics, showing pictures of people drinking in the videos and showing porn and things like that. The FBI was warning. The FBI actually put out a warning to businesses and to schools that criminals could be listening and could interfere with the video conference. And there's a number of ways that they can do that. And mind you, this is not a vulnerability in the software. This is what I would call a misconfiguration. The fact that defaults were not as secure as they could have been and were not consistently deployed. And users did not have awareness of all the different security features that they could take advantage of. So Zoom has really been trying to educate users and rolling out more secure defaults. They actually rolled out they rolled out a feature where passwords are on by default last summer, but they just discovered and announced that apparently it was not consistently applied to all users. Then there was an article in the New York Times that said Zoom bombing becomes a dangerous organized effort. And this is where it gets really hard for users to figure out what is a real problem. So I want to help clarify some of this today. If you actually read through these articles, it sounds like they're becoming organized from the title, and that maybe these are like terrorist groups or organized crime groups that are deliberately coordinating to attack Zoom meetings. But no, when you get midway through the article, pretty far down, it talks about the fact that they interviewed people who were doing Zoom bombings. And these were groups of people who were discussing on Twitter and on Reddit and things like that. And most of them were teenagers. And the teenagers were complaining to the reporters that they had too much schoolwork and they were trying to find something else to do. So this is what happens when school is essentially canceled for a huge number of teenagers, apparently. They turn to things like this. And of course, it's also really easy to make mistakes in these new environments. Even major world leaders do that. So Boris Johnson, who's the leader of the UK, is quarantined and so had their first cabinet meeting over Zoom. This was a big deal. He was really proud of it. He tweeted it, and unfortunately, he tweeted the Zoom meeting ID. So that means that if people knew the password, they could potentially join the Zoom meeting. There were immediately thousands of people who tried to guess the meeting passwords. There was some speculation that people might jump in and Zoom bomb future meetings if they weren't careful about setting the passwords, things like that. But this is just an example of the fact that these errors can happen at even the highest levels. Zoom also has a feature where you can do one-click joins where you don't need a separate meeting password. It's all integrated into the link. And sometimes people accidentally publish that and then are surprised that their meeting gets, well, Zoom bombed. Also, both hackers and researchers have been ramping up their tools. Just in the past week or two, a new war dialing tool was released. It's called ZWarDial. And in this case, researchers demonstrated that they could enumerate Zoom meeting IDs, because Zoom meeting IDs are really just a string of 9 to 11 letters and numbers. And so it is possible to enumerate those and to potentially figure out what someone's meeting ID is. They were able to find approximately 100 meetings per hour. The way you could prevent this from happening is by setting a password on the meeting, and then they can't find that meeting anymore. So the problem is that people are not taking advantage of this feature that Zoom has where you can set a password on the meeting. And now we're starting to see stolen meeting IDs and passwords for sale. Again, Zoom bombing has become big. People are willing to apparently pay for Zoom credentials. Also, of course, there's the issue of credential stuffing, where if somebody has a Zoom password, they probably use it for something else, like maybe eBay or PayPal or things like that. So credentials, no matter where they're stolen from, are often valuable to somebody. In this case, it's only the very beginnings of a market for this. A hacker provided a link to 352 compromised Zoom accounts. That's not very many, but chances are that is just the tip of the iceberg, and there are probably currently other Zoom credentials for sale on the dark web that we have not yet detected and publicized. All of this is in keeping with the top threats today. According to Verizon's Data Breach Investigations report of 2019, so just last year, the two top threats, the two top vectors that criminals use to gain access were number one, phishing, and number two, use of stolen credentials. And that's a little misleading because phishing is often used to steal credentials. As a senior Microsoft executive said, hackers don't break in, they log in. That is the truth these days. So whether you're using Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams or other platforms, think about the methods that you use to authenticate. Just to recap, for those of you who may not have been on our last webinars, there are 3 common ways to authenticate, to verify someone's identity in the world of cybersecurity. You verify your identity with something you know, like a password, something you have, that could be a key fob like you see in the picture, or maybe your mobile device, or something you are, like a fingerprint or your face, biometrics. When we talk about multi-factor authentication, we're talking about using more than one type of authentication together. That's something you do all the time when you use your debit card, by the way, at the bank, so it can be done, or when you use your debit card at an ATM and you go to withdraw cash, you have the physical card, you have the PIN, multi-factor authentication. It can be simple and easy. When I first started, when we were talking about two-factor authentication, this was a really tough problem. Even 7, 8 years ago, it was a very difficult problem. But today, 95% of Americans have cell phones and over 77% of Americans have smartphones. And that means that many people are able to use these very strong Authenticator apps. They are cheap, they are easy, you don't have to pay for extra hardware, you don't have to worry about the timing getting out of sync. Almost 15, gosh, it was 15 years ago. I used to work at the Children's Hospital Boston, and I was responsible for overseeing and configuring and maintaining the RSA Secure ID two-factor authentication system. And those little buggers would get out of sync, and a doctor might not be able to come into the network, and I would get a call at 3 in the morning. It was the bane of my existence. But these days, it's much, much easier. You can also use software like Duo if you're trying to coordinate organization-wide. Highly recommend it. We also at LMG have created some videos of how to set up two-factor authentication with Office 365 and with G Suite very quickly in 5 minutes or less. So check it out, lmgsecurity.com/passwords, and you can see those setup videos. Not all two-factor authentication is created equal, and I just want to point this out. I recently wrote a blog post on this. It's important for you to use strong two-factor authentication whenever possible. There have been many practical attacks that hackers are implementing using text message-based authentication. So if you're relying on a PIN that gets sent to your phone, game over. Years ago in 2016, the NIST, the federal government in the United States, said that it was no longer considered a secure way of authenticating people. So we want to move away from SMS text message based authentication and instead support stronger methods of authentication like an app and other methods. We'll get into that in a little bit. So speaking of which, I just want to take one more little detour before we get back to Zoom, because this is going to come up a lot. The future of authentication is passwordless. I don't know about you, but passwords are dead to me. I am so tired of seeing people get hacked because a password got stolen. Somebody clicked on a link. And it's a huge risk. Passwords are a huge risk, in particular when you have people in work from home environments, especially BYOD, where their computers are not well supervised. They may have an infection that allows them to get hacked. So instead, we're moving to more convenient options, frankly. My hope is in another few years, it will be really common to see facial biometrics, hardware keys, which are already widely deployed. If you look at the graphic in the lower left, you'll see examples of the YubiKey 5 security keys that support NFC, USB, Bluetooth. You can use new options like animated QR codes. One of the ones that I'm most excited about is behavioral analysis. Again, if you look in the bottom right, you can see an example where you type something and they're actually creating a profile of you based on the hesitations and the ways that you type, or the ways that you gesture, the ways that you touch your phone or that you move, little things that you would never even notice and that you can't fake. There are some performance and security benefits to passwordless authentication. In addition to being more secure, it is also more efficient. So if we can reduce SMS costs by moving away from text message-based authentication, that's great. That saves a lot of money. And then another one that I love, this is from the World Economic Forum. They just did a study on this in collaboration with the FIDO Alliance, and they found that there was a 92% increased authentication success when they moved away from password-based authentication. And they had been sending pins to phones. This was for financial institutions. They found that there was no SMS timeout, no input inconvenience where people had to type things in. So customers loved this. It was more efficient and more secure. Typically, when things work better, they're more secure, right? Because users don't bypass them. They don't write down passwords, for example, if you don't have any. Okay, so let's get back to Zoom and the confidentiality of Zoom. Citizen Lab did recently, a cybersecurity research organization did a study and came out with this just last week. So they did what they called a quick look at the confidentiality of Zoom meetings. And they found that Zoom's claim that the app uses AES 256 encryption for meetings is wrong, that they were not using that. They were using a single AES 128 key, which is much less secure. They were also, just to back it up, they also claimed to be using end-to-end encryption, but it seemed like maybe there was a disconnect between the technology folks and the marketing folks, because they seem to have a different opinion on what end-to-end encryption meant than the rest of the security world. So they do not actually use end-to-end encryption. They have come out and said that they are going to be working on this. So the bottom line is that you know, Zoom, every organization needs to make your own decisions as to whether or not it's appropriate for you to use Zoom. I can tell you that from a security professional's perspective, they have responded amazingly well. It is certainly abnormal for any organization to suddenly have the level of scrutiny that they had, and they are taking all of these findings seriously, and I have every confidence that they will be coming up with solutions here shortly. Another thing that Citizen Lab came up with, which should make everybody think carefully, is that there was a key server in Zoom based in Beijing, China. So there's a serious concern that all of the communications going through that could be intercepted. Again, that's something to consider when you do your cost-benefit analysis and look at your risks and what you can accept. Also, take a careful look at the legalese that comes along with your contract for whatever cloud provider you're setting up with. Do they guarantee that their servers are in a particular country? Do they say that their servers could be around the world? Do they give you an option? And are they audited by third parties? Because again, in this case, we're finding that some of the things that Zoom claimed were not actually the case. Those third-party audits are really important. And as customers, you should request them, or at least to get letters of attestation. So we started seeing the media throwing out headlines like Zoom is malware, why experts worry about the video conferencing platform. And there were certainly valid bugs that were found. Zoom lets attackers steal Windows credentials. There was an issue with that. But frankly, most of the security issues that happen are things that would be considered low to medium risk with any other type of software. And several security professionals have called that out. Dave Kennedy, very well respected in our industry, is one. He said, example of hyperbole for the Zoom discussion and horrid fear-mongering by the media and comments from individuals that are not even security researchers. And then he and another security professional, Amit Sirpur, put out a statement that said, Zoom is not malware. So the bottom line with Zoom is that it's not perfect, but they are responding very quickly, and it is not malware. For many organizations, it is still a reasonable choice unless you are concerned about like nation state interception or attacks. Here's a little Zoom security checklist. I'm not going to read through everything, but I'll call out the highlights, and you will have a copy of this presentation afterwards as a PDF, so you can just download this and take a look at it. We'll also be coming out with additional checklists here in the next week or two, and we'll make sure when we send out the link to the video that you'll also see a link to those additional checklists. Okay, but number one, just make sure that you require a password when scheduling new meetings. These are the kinds of things that can be set as defaults at the administrative level, unless you choose to unset them. And it's also a good idea to train your users on the importance of this as well. So include this as you're doing your awareness trainings. And speaking of which, doing cybersecurity awareness trainings right now is really important. Again, you're welcome to use this checklist. Turn off embed passwords in meeting link for one-click join, because that kind of takes away that second factor. And again, these meeting links are ones that sometimes get published by accident, and then all but bets are off. Use the waiting room feature. That's an additional feature where you get to individually approve people who come into the Zoom meeting. Let's see some other important ones. Use MFA whenever possible. And again, this is not just a Zoom issue. This is also something you should look for in any video conferencing software. Does it support multi-factor authentication? Right now, from what I can tell, Zoom supports multi-factor authentication only in the web interface and not in the desktop client. So that's a pretty big hurdle that they need to overcome. And again, one that it sounds like they're working on. They're actually going to be giving weekly updates every Wednesday on their progress that they're making tackling these security issues. And of course, use strong passwords. I know I said passwords are dead to me, and they are. But if you're going to use them, you should definitely pick a good one. It definitely doesn't hurt. Passwords, however, can give us a false sense of security because a lot of people rely on them and think, oh, I picked a really long password, I'm safe. And the problem is we're seeing so many people reuse passwords and so many people whose computers are infected with spyware that if either one of those things happens, their account can easily be broken into. So run, don't walk to multi-factor authentication. Okay, so again, beyond Zoom, these basic principles apply to other collaboration apps as well. Slack is another example where they had a critical vulnerability just in the past month that allows automated account takeovers. They're not getting quite the level of press that Zoom is, but that's pretty significant. Another one, Cisco WebEx, had high severity flaws that they suddenly announced and then fixed after, and we only find out about it after the fact. So those are two other ones, and who knows what else is being found right now that will be announced in 3 months or 6 months or even more. Take a peek at our other handout, the Cloud Cybersecurity Checklist. When you are evaluating, I know we've all been rushing to pick video conference software, and hopefully everybody has something in place that's working for you, but we can do better. And we can also push video conference providers to do better, which is what is happening right now. So take a look at the checklist. You want to look at things like authentication. What options do they support? Where is it located? Who owns the data and who has access? Can they analyze the content of your video conference meetings? That's a little concerning. Monitoring and logging is key. You should be able to get the logging that you want, who logged in and when, and were there any unauthorized logins? If they have a cybersecurity incident or data breach, will they notify you? And if so, when will they notify you? Things like that. Again, take a peek at number 9 also. They should be getting regular security assessments by qualified third-party professionals, especially if they're serving a wide audience. That's something that Zoom has now committed to doing. And you should be able to ask for a letter of attestation. I know this because LMG does these types of assessments for some companies, and we always provide them with a letter of attestation that they can then provide to clients that ask for it, but you may need to ask for it. I know that remote work security can feel really overwhelming for a lot of folks, and rest assured that you are doing a great job. And just aim for progress. It does not have to be perfect. We are all in this together, and we're all moving forward. And just be vocal with your service providers about what you need, and hopefully everybody else will be doing the same. All right, let's talk about some of the other services that we're using in order to stay connected. Many organizations need workers to have remote access to their internal networks, or to what you might call internal networks in the cloud networks. Here you can see some numbers that I pulled from Shodan. Shodan is the internet search engine. It'll show you everything that's out there connected to the big bad internet. And on March 25th, I pulled these statistics and I found that there were 725,972 exposed RDP logins in the United States. And then on April 8th, this morning, I pulled it again and I found there were 846,000. So that's almost 125,000 additional RDP interfaces that sprung up on the internet just in the past couple of weeks. That is an amazingly huge difference when you think about it. And about 20,000 of these were in Azure specifically. So we're seeing a lot of people spinning up these cloud environments very quickly, and the reason we're seeing so many of these exposed directly to the internet is because they often have insecure defaults. And this is exactly what it was with Zoom as well, where they don't want to stand in the user's way. They want it to just work as soon as the user gets it set up. And the result is that in this case, when you create a new virtual machine in Azure, RDP on default port 3389 is open by default. So that's part of why I'm sure we're seeing so many of these spring up. The problem is that RDP is a really effective way for hackers to get into your network. Here on the top left, you can see a new brute force hacking bot called Goldbrute, the enemy of RDP. So they're exploiting vulnerable password-based authentication systems. It's a botnet campaign, just trying to gather these weak RDP credentials so that they can log in or sell them or do what criminals want to do. In the bottom, you can see when we talked, was it a couple weeks ago, about ransomware, one of the big ways that ransomers get into your company's network is through RDP. They break in using a weak password. And of course, right now, when so many people are spinning up RDP quickly, sometimes without even realizing it, and they're spinning up virtual environments very quickly, having strong and unique passwords is not the first thing on your minds, and that is completely understandable. You need to stand it up, get it functional, get it running as quickly as possible. So we're kind of in cleanup mode right now, I think, and hopefully everybody can breathe a little bit and step back if you haven't already, and just try to look at what passwords you're using and what forms of authentication you're using and strengthen them over the coming weeks. Because I'm concerned because we are seeing an uptick in attacks and in compromises. Those are not going away. And the last thing you need in a crisis like this is also to get hacked or also to get ransomware. It's very hard to respond to a ransomware attack when everybody is quarantined. Okay, remember, hackers don't break in, they log in. So we got to protect our authentication. Okay, so how do we protect our login interfaces and have control over remote workstations? Well, a VPN can be a very effective way to do that. Many of us think of a VPN as the tool we use to encrypt our communications and ensure confidentiality. And of course, it also prevents your poor little RDP interface from sitting out there all alone on the street corner of the internet. Instead, the VPN is hardened, it is much lower risk, and it will protect that. But there's also some features of VPNs that you can take advantage of, which many organizations have not yet configured. You can use some VPNs to scan remote devices, make sure they're up to date on patches, up to date on antivirus, that all of the right security policies have been deployed. You might want to think about whether you want to do split tunnel versus full tunnel. Full tunnel gives you a chance to inspect users' traffic. It can help prevent malicious attacks. It can help you find malware in a lot of cases. However, there are some privacy concerns, especially if people are staying connected from home all the time. They may not realize that their web surfing is going through the company's network. And then also it can create more of a load on your network as opposed to split tunnel, where traffic that's going out to the internet just goes directly there and does not go through your corporate network. So you may need to have ongoing conversations about split tunnel versus full tunnel, depending on your capacity and where you are in your remote work setup process. And then finally, it's always a good idea to segment your network and put those VPN users that are coming from home off in a different segment whenever you can. So again, something to think about. Right now at LMG, we are doing security cleanups for many of our clients. I just want everybody on this call to know you're not alone. It's okay that all of us rushed really quickly to get these deployed. And now we're finding, a good example is virtual desktop infrastructures where IT companies or in-house IT are just racing to get those platforms stood up as quickly as possible so that your day-to-day operations can keep going virtually. And then that one template gets deployed out 100 or 1,000 times, depending on how many employees you have. And there's never a chance to stop and have a security professional look at the configuration. So it is worth doing that. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and making a little tweak right now can save you from having a nasty data breach or discovering that you have something like a banking Trojan in a few months. Same thing with your VPN configuration. VPNs do get hacked. In fact, criminals have been targeting some vulnerable VPN software over the past 3 or 4 months very effectively, because you need to patch your VPNs in addition to your desktops, and sometimes that's not the top priority. And finally, you can just do quick perimeter port scans. Really easy, really ineffective. I recommend that everybody do them, or sorry, really effective and cheap. I recommend that everybody do them at least once a month so that you know if you do have an open RDP port just hanging out there. And if you do need to leave, there are cases where people, again, are in emergency situations and you're standing things up and you need to poke a hole in that firewall right now. Number one, don't forget about it. Make sure you document it, get approval if you need to get approval, and then come back and start to narrow down the access to that. If you absolutely must have RDP, you can do source IP address filtering, whitelisting. You can require you can require certificate-based authentication so that only approved devices can come in easily, things like that. So if you have any more questions or if you need any help, check out our website, lmgsecurity.com/remote security. You can also drop me a line on LinkedIn if you have any questions. Okay, as I was doing this presentation, I decided to type work from home into my image search system, Shutterstock. And this was one of the first images that came up, which is amazing how the definition of work from home has changed to, I'm going to be here with my laptop and hand sanitizer and a mask. This is unrealistic because I don't think we have very many masks, but nonetheless, this is the society that we're in right now. Coronavirus has, as this article said, a huge stressful experiment in working from home. We've already been increasing the amount that we all work remotely over the past several years, but this is certainly very quickly increasing the rate of adoption. So over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about managing your assets while people are working remotely, physical security challenges, how you maintain control, access control in these environments when you may have roommates or friends or family around. BYOD, I like to think of it as emergency BYOD. Let's talk about those situations where maybe you didn't plan on supporting as much BYOD as you are, and therefore you don't have the ability to reduce risk quite as quickly as you'd like to. So it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your computers are? Chances are, I bet in every organization, in fact, let's all raise our hands. How many of you have employees, maybe even yourselves, who have taken work equipment home? Wow, that's all of you. That's amazing. And in most situations, people have not been keeping track of this. In a lot of cases, it wasn't even possible. I mean, some people were told suddenly that they couldn't go into work. Maybe employees grabbed one last thing and left. I've seen situations where an employee ran in at the last second and was like, can I take that desktop home? Things like that. And this puts you in situations where you never dreamed that that desktop, which is unencrypted, would end up in somebody's living room or somebody's bedroom. You may not even know how many pieces of equipment a certain employee has. So now's the time to pause, deep breath collectively, and figure out, okay, how do we take an inventory of our organizations? This is not something I have seen reported anywhere, and I think it's going to become an increasingly huge issue. So what kinds of equipment are employees bringing home? Well, computers, laptops and desktops, monitors, some cases multiple monitors, which is great. No problem with this if people, if your organization allows it and people need to be effective. Keyboards, mice, desks, chairs. We're going to be at this for months. In a lot of cases, people need an ergonomic environment. Locks, sometimes things like locks to help secure your home environment. Maybe you have a lockable file cabinet at work that you've brought home. Now you have a lot of information at home. So how can we keep track of this? You might want to consider doing a survey. It's simple, it's effective, but start by just creating a spreadsheet. What do I need to know about each asset? Send it out to your managers, have them send it out to their employees or however you normally do that, and set a deadline, 30 days. We need to get these back. And you may also, when people start coming back into the office, or if you have people in the office, you might want to just do a walk around and compare with your asset management system and see if you can figure out what's been taken and what hasn't. Notice any discrepancies. Then you'll want to come up with a checkout system, because again, we may be at this for a while. We may have additional events in the fall or next winter where people will need to be quarantined again. So have a checkout system, have a process, and do these periodic checks. I can tell you in a lot of cases, like at LMG, we have been ramping up on purchasing microphones and headsets because we have quite a few employees that do webinars and we don't want people to have to go to each other's houses or to have to share. But that means we have new equipment getting ordered that's never going to be physically delivered to central IT. So how do you track that? How do you stay on top of it? And then consider what happens. A lot of organizations are doing furloughs and layoffs, and they're doing that before they're even thinking about the fact that employees have tens of thousands of dollars of equipment all spread across their home environments that they may well end up keeping. Because if you go back to an employee in a year who was laid off, they are probably not going to say, oh, here's all my monitors and stuff like that. They may have even gotten rid of it by that point. So just, think about it and consider what happens if your organization does need to furlough and people have equipment at home. All right, so let's step through what the home environment actually looks like and what are some of the issues that come up. I know this first one so well. I have 2 children and they think keyboards are so fun. But of course, this is not always fun for your staff. It's not fun necessarily for the people on the other end. So it's really important to start off and encourage employees to define your workspace and communicate your boundaries. I actually have a little poster I'm putting together, should be out in the next few days. But it's just designed to communicate gently and politely to people that you may live with that this is what my workspace looks like. This is what my workspace is, and these are the general guidelines that I want to adhere to. And I'm lucky enough to have a lockable home office. Not everybody is, and so we'll talk about some of the issues that creates and how you can deal with it. Then there's cases like this. Let's say you come up and find your teenage kid using your company computer. Does this happen? Of course this happens. It happens all the time. It happens for a few different reasons. Sometimes families just share with each other, hey dad, can I use your computer to look at a video? And what you don't know is that the teenager is going to gaming websites and other high risk websites that can expose you to malware. Or maybe the kids, not just kids, but maybe the person you're sharing your computer with starts poking around or sees something that's on your desktop. That can potentially be a data breach or a case of unauthorized access where you would have to notify somebody. So the bottom line, and sometimes you may find that you leave your computer unlocked accidentally without even realizing it, or you have different expectations than the other people in your house do. So again, back to the communicating your expectations. In this case, sharing does not equal caring. If you have sensitive data, or if your employees have sensitive data on their computers, make sure you establish a policy of not sharing access to that computer. This can get kind of tricky when it's BYOD, when it is a personal device. And in that case, I would say if they share the device itself, which is, there's pros and cons to that, it would not be my first recommendation, but if they need to share it, make sure they have a separate account and that it's password controlled and all that. Make sure every device has a password and a PIN. And screen locking. Screen locking is one of the places where we see a lot of vulnerabilities with remote workers because some employees don't know how to lock their screen or it's not easy to do. So I would recommend when you can set an automated timer and encourage your employees to do that as well so it automatically locks after a certain amount of time and teach them how that very simple thing, how to lock it quickly. Sometimes you have spies in your midst and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh, cats. Here's a case where you may have a worker that has a roommate that doesn't have a very good private space, is struggling a little bit, but needs to get some work done. You can give them some security tools to help them. Things like a privacy screen can make it a little bit easier. So it might be worth just figuring out, what can we do to make employees more secure in simple ways and seeing if anybody needs these things. Then you get cases where sometimes people share information with their spouses or show things to family members or roommates. And it's really important, nobody's there to oversee them in this home environment. It's super important to have very clear policies of what you can share and what you can't. And if you are concerned or if you're okay with spouses and employees sharing information, you might want to broach the topic with your legal team of whether you should get roommates or spouses under NDA. In certain high security situations, that might be appropriate. And finally, back to our environment. It's very common for people to have physical files on their desks. And sometimes their desks, again, are not in locked spaces. If you do have the ability to have a room with a lock on it, fantastic. And if you have employees that have a room that doesn't have a lock, you might consider offering to front the costs for a lock on that room. It could save you a lot of headache. Some other alternatives are a lockable set of drawers, things like that, if they're going to be working from home for an extended period of time. I would recommend things like combination locks or potentially biometrics, because if you give somebody a lock with a key, they're just going to hide the key like in the next desk drawer or someplace where a roommate may stumble across it. Also, we see people writing down passwords all the time. Really important to use those password managers so people don't feel inclined to do that. And finally, a clean desk policy is just as important in the home environment, if not more important, because it's so easy for other people in that home to stumble across documents. So have your staff put things away at the end of the night if that desk is not in a lockable space. All right, so let's talk about lost and stolen devices. Over the years, we've had definitely the number of lost and stolen devices that are reported as breaches has gone down. And that's because most states have a safe harbor clause that says, okay, you have a stolen laptop, but it's encrypted. And if it's encrypted, you don't need to report it as a breach. But we still see a lot of equipment thefts, which cost you money. So keep that in mind. Here, just in December, we had Truman Medical Centers had a laptop that contained data for more than 114,000 patients. For whatever reason, it was not encrypted. It may have been a personal device, maybe it was a hospital device, who knows? And it was stolen from a vehicle. One of the most common ways that laptops are stolen. People put it on the front seat, put it in a bag that's in a really obvious place. Somebody smashes that pane of glass and it's gone, and you have to report it as a data breach. So these days, we're doing rapid deployment as a society. We're doing rapid deployment of mobile devices in a lot of cases, and that means that we're often cutting corners or we don't see these configuration issues. So double check on the encryption piece of it and make sure that you've got that covered. And feel free to shout out if you have any questions on this stuff, by the way. Okay, so how do we defend against lost or stolen devices? By the way, throughout this presentation, I put that red lock in the upper left corner for any slides where I'm listing defensive measures that you can take. So again, when you download that PDF, you will be able to see it. First of all, make sure you establish a clear policy. At LMG, we have a sample remote work policy template that I know a number of our clients have downloaded. Check it out. I have the link right there on the screen. Make sure that you've deployed encryption. Make sure that you have, well, not make sure, but you might want to consider distributing laptop locks. It can help in certain physical environments. And this is where you might actually want to check in with your employees and find out, what is your physical security like to begin with? Do you have a lot of roommates? Do you have what you need to keep sensitive information secure or not? And if so, can we help? Training is key, especially since everyone is working remotely. Think about doing on-demand videos. At LMG, we do regular cybersecurity training on demand. We have cute little animated videos. So drop us a line if you want any more information on that. We're really excited about it. And finally, make sure you have a clear reporting process. If a device gets lost or stolen, Often remote workers do not report that for an extended period of time because the communication is not great. And it's also harder for IT to respond to incidents when everyone is working remotely in a lot of cases. So make sure everyone knows who to call and what the appropriate time frame is. All right, let's talk about emergency BYOD. This situation is very different than when you're planning to go BYOD, because in that case, you can pick your mobile device management software. You can decide what your policies are. You have time to train people. You have time to get them to sign things. In this case, I have been talking to a number of financial institutions where they were required to send people home, and their staff has been communicating over Gmail, over personal emails, using personal computers because they need to help their customers and they need to stay in operation. They are an essential business, but to stay in business, they're lucky in that their employees have these resources available, but it also places you at great risk. So BYOD, of course, with BYOD, there's a different risk model than with work devices, because if people are using a device for their personal use, they may engage in higher risk web surfing. So they might install games, they might install utilities, they might go to gambling websites, pornography websites, things like that. And each of these places them at a much higher risk of having malicious software installed on the device. They might also not have their own antivirus software, or maybe they're not keeping it up to date. They certainly do not have continuous monitoring when they're not connected to your network, except in extremely rare circumstances. So that means that it's harder for IDS and IPS systems to be alerting in real time. Here's one case on the right where this is an example of where an employee who had their computer hacked had a password stolen. They did not have single-factor authentication, and this happened to be an IT administrator. And criminals used that administrative passcode to log into the business email system and take over the company's assets. This hit the news big time. It was really embarrassing for Deloitte and caused a major financial and reputational damage. It's funny because this type of case happens so often that we saw it ourselves. We had a case, a biomedical company, where there was an IT administrator who often logged in from a personal device. And again, if that's the situation you're in, that is totally fine. You can take precautions to help reduce your risk. Unfortunately, in this case, nobody knew it was occurring, and the IT administrator really was not taking precautions. He had been doing high-risk web surfing. His computer did have malware on it. His password was captured. He had saved his remote credentials in Chrome, and so the criminals stole that, got into the company's network remotely using RDP, installed ransomware, and then it turned out before they installed ransomware, they actually stole all of the organization's data. So this caused a major operational outage for the firm, and also financial damage and things like that. And it was all because of one home user whose password was stolen. So if you deploy two-factor authentication, of course, or multi-factor authentication, I should say, that really helps with it. Also, some of our stronger types of authentication where we're not relying on passwords are useful as well. But what you may not know is cloud environments that you might already be leveraging may well have features that can help you secure these home environments and stay safe. For example, Microsoft Azure has a conditional access option. So let's say you have an employee logging in, it can check and see what applications are installed, which device is this, and it evaluates what the risk is that this is a criminal versus this is a legitimate login. It has all kinds of behavioral analytics. And so based on that whole combination of factors, it will decide, is it going to allow access, require multi-factor authentication or not, or is it just going to block that access? So for example, we see in educational environments, you might want to download an Outlook app on a cell phone or on a smartphone in order to get access to the university's email. And one of our colleagues had his phone scanned, and it was not allowed to install that app until he changed some of the security settings to meet that policy. So that's really helpful and effective, and it may not cost you much more at all. Another issue with remote work, especially the emergency BYOD, is where is your data? In a lot of cases, people are working from home, they're struggling to exchange documents, and they might send copies of data to their personal email or send it up to Dropbox, places like that. They might put it on USBs. A really common thing is that people use their printers at home and don't realize that every document they print stays on the hard drive of that printer indefinitely. There's, of course, concerns about spyware and malware on the device. We spoke about that, sometimes lack of proper encryption, and you may not get those devices back if you're deploying corporate, or if you're, you may not get those devices back if an employee is furloughed or lays off or is laid off or just chooses to separate. So those are things to think about when you allow people to use BYOD. You might want to talk to your legal team and just get some kind of agreement put into place. You can also restrict downloads. This is really critical. So for example, this is with Office 365. You can set it so that if someone is coming in from an unmanaged device, or if they're coming from an IP address or a physical location that is not on your whitelist, that they can't actually download files, but they can access them. So they can edit them in the cloud, they can still do a lot of work, but they can't actually copy that data onto their local systems. That is huge. And for those of you that use Office 365, I would urge you to take advantage of this feature. Finally, if you have time, consider deploying a mobile device management MDM tool. I know probably a lot of you already have, but for those of you who weren't planning on BYOD, you may just be looking into that. An MDM will allow you to remotely wipe data. Again, if people separate from your organization, that's super helpful, or if a device gets lost or stolen. And on that same point, if a device is lost or stolen, it's really helpful for you to be able to track that device. You can ensure that antivirus software is installed, even on BYOD systems. You can enforce policies, make sure that there's screen locking, that there's pins, without having to roll things out to individual devices. So MDMs are very powerful and can save you a lot of headaches in the long run. I'm going to leave you with this emergency BYOD checklist. On the left, you can see things for IT to consider doing. And then on the right, you can see the checklist for employees. So you might want to consider taking a look at these checklists. If you want, tweak them for your own organization and then sending them out to IT or to employees. All right, let's take a look at who is teleworking and what that risk level is. And we'll also move into the COVID-19 scams. That's how we're going to wrap up. One thing I think is interesting is what percentage of employees can telework based on their occupation. You can see that the #1 type of worker that is able to work remotely are management, business, and financial operations. Wow, that means that 60% of those people are potentially online, 60% or more. This was a study released in September of 2019, and it was based on 2018 data. So these types of workers often have financial information. Maybe they can do wire transfers. They might have social security numbers, all kinds of juicy and valuable data that hackers want. The next one is professionals who might have access to intellectual property, sales folks who have contact information, pricing, sometimes financial information as well, payment information. And then the fourth is office and administrative support, people who have access to usually W-2s, social security numbers, sometimes payroll information. So all these people who can telework are, by the nature of their jobs, processing a lot of very sensitive data. And so it's not surprising that criminals are ramping up their attacks. Just 2 days ago, the FBI announced that they anticipated a rise in business email compromise schemes that are related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So just to refresh our memories, business email compromise is where criminals break into someone's email, often by stealing a password, and they might search. There's all kinds of scams, but a very common one is to search for an invoice, and then they'll make a fake invoice, or they'll intercept an upcoming wire transfer and have that money directed to the wrong place, and then they make off with the money. So these days, the FBI is seeing criminals using coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic, as an excuse. Oh, we have an urgent wire. It has to be processed immediately because of the coronavirus crisis. And we've actually changed our bank account because of the funding issues, that kind of thing. Earlier, we saw coronavirus criminals, I'll call them, impersonating organizations like the World Health Organization. So click on the button below to download safety measures, and then you were asked to verify your email. The website looks really official, and they steal your email address and password if you do that. It's evil. Here's another one. This organization was actually indicted recently, but you can order all kinds of coronavirus-related kits and products online. In this case, the company, the fraudsters, were saying that the World Health Organization is giving away vaccine kits. Oh my God, $4.95, might as well try it. And they even had reviews. Here's what recent users are saying. The site looked really professional. And of course, they were taken down by the United States of America. There was a preliminary injunction and almost certainly more to come on that one. So they caught the criminals in that case, which is nice to see. Here's some other examples of scams where they're trying to separate you from your money. These are ones that we received. We have a spam list. If you find good spam, send it to me, by the way, spam@lmgsecurity.com. I love seeing that stuff. Here you can see people are offering masks. If you pay for this, are you going to get your money back? I bet they'll take your credit card number, right? And then phone scams. I loved these. So people are getting spam calls. Hey, for 79 bucks, our trained technicians will do a full air duct cleaning and sanitation to make sure that the air you breathe is free of bacteria. Another one, if you want to receive a free testing kit delivered overnight to your home, press 1. And these are scams that people are falling for, robocalls. One that I thought was really evil is a scam that came out recently that said, faced with unprecedented economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 outbreak, the Trump administration is considering sending most American adults a check for $1,000. You need to verify your email account for the new payroll directory and adjustment for the month of March benefit payment. A lot of people are going to click on this because they're concerned about finances. The Federal Trade Commission says that attackers follow the headlines, and it is true. If there's something that's worrying Americans or anyone in the world and is creating a sense of urgency, they will take advantage of that. The last thing we're seeing, just to bring it full circle, are remote work scans. So we've been seeing more and more of these. Office 365 voicemail. Now that people are not sitting at their desks using their desk phones, a lot of times they're just getting used to these new online systems. Oh, I have email remotely now. They must have just rolled that out. And of course, if you click on listen or download, you get infected with malicious software, almost certainly. We're also seeing things like Zoom and other video conference software being used for phishing attacks. So here you can see the daily registration of new Zoom domains. These are websites that contain malware or are designed to capture employees' usernames and credentials. And because so many people are using Zoom, we are also seeing a spike in the number of domains with the word Zoom in it every single day. So it's cool that you can see that being tracked. This is by Checkpoint, I believe. Here's what one of the websites hosts. It looks like an executable file that is for installing Zoom, but it actually installs malware and Zoom. And finally, this is a new development. There is a new cryptocurrency miner that is being bundled with a Zoom installer. So Zoom is not hosting this themselves. These are malicious websites that are advertising, hey, install Zoom. And they actually have a Zoom installer, but they're putting malware in with it. So if someone accidentally clicks on one of those links and installs that application, their computer will be infected with cryptocurrency mining software, and the criminals will be making money every minute of every day off of you and your resources. So to wrap things up, here's my last checklist, remote work security tips for employees. Again, feel free to look at this afterwards. It includes things like know your organization's remote work policies and follow them. Some of you may be thinking, I'm not sure that our remote work policies apply today because there's a lot of exceptions and things are changing. So sometimes that's the first thing that you need to do as an organization. Figure out what are our emergency remote work policies, and then how can we make sure that this is going to work long term. Things like having employees secure their home wireless network, following your organization's secure disposal policies. If an employee does have a physical piece of paper or some other thing, a CD, whatever, that should not go in the normal trash, make sure that there's a plan for that, that they know where to put it, that they're not just gonna toss it in the trash, because I bet you dumpster diving is really good right now. And again, progress, not perfection. You guys are all doing great. I'm so proud to be part of this community, and I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Check it out. We have a sample policy template up at LMG's website, and we also have our new remote work security services if you need any help.
Thank you, Sherry. I'd encourage all attendees to use the questions tab in the webinar interface if you have any remaining questions. That being said, we did have a few questions that came from our audience during the presentation. So Sherry, how are VPNs vulnerable? Aren't they designed to be secure?
Yep, absolutely. VPNs are, of course, designed to be as secure as possible, but there is no silver bullet. And VPNs do have vulnerabilities in them. They do need to be kept patched and updated. Also, any VPN is only as good as the way that you authenticate to it. So if you're using a strong password, if you've got multi-factor authentication set up, then it's going to be a lot more secure than if you're just relying on a weak or reused password.
Great, thank you. The next question that we received is, should we be concerned about active listening devices in the home, such as Google Home or Amazon Alexa?
This is a really good question because a lot of people do have these active listening devices, and every organization needs to consider and address this on a case-by-case basis, or at least decide what your own policy is. In general, I would not want employees, for myself, I would not want employees to have sensitive conversations in a room with an Echo or with a Google Home device or anything like that. So I think that's a pretty safe policy if you're dealing with sensitive information. Hopefully you can just keep those devices in a different room or keep them off during those conversations. But again, every organization is different and we all have to balance the benefits and the risks.
Great, so we're almost out of time, but we did have one more question. Do you recommend a specific password manager, and should password managers be implemented in a business environment?
Password managers should absolutely be implemented in a business environment. You'll want to decide if you want a password manager that is in the cloud or if it's on site. Many organizations, even high security organizations, use password managers in the cloud these days. If you do, require two-factor authentication for access to your password manager, because if an employee gets the master password stolen, you don't want them to be losing the keys to the kingdom. I'd say that's one of the big concerns with configuring these pieces of software. It's just a really great idea. Also for purposes of password escrow, if somebody leaves, they might have 50 or 80 different passwords, and you might be able to have access to that if you have deployed a password manager program. Pretty much all the major ones are strong these days. LastPass is very popular, Dashlane, 1Password. There's lots of other good ones. If you have any questions specifically about your environment, feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn.
Great, thank you. We did receive one more that I'm just going to squeeze in there, but knowing that Zoom has security issues, are not all video conferencing platforms at risk of this link and if the password is shared?
If a password is shared publicly, I mean,
Are not all video conferencing platforms at risk if the link and password is shared?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you expose the link and the password, then pretty much anybody can join, and that's a user error and a user training issue. In fact, most of the Zoom issues we're seeing are not fundamental security issues, the ones that are making the headlines. It's lack of user awareness or user understanding about what the defaults are and what appropriate or what the secure configuration is. So I'm really pleased to see that they're taking care of having strong defaults, that they're rolling out some additional features, and I fully expect that we're going to see this addressed fairly expediently.
Great, thank you, Sherry. We would like to thank everyone who attended. Please take a moment to fill out the survey afterwards and let us know what you thought. The recorded video from this presentation will be made available to attendees, and we will send out a notification once live. Thank you and have a great day.